Our last story tonight is about a statue. A statue of the Buddha has been found in Egypt. It dates back to the age of the Roman Empire. Egypt has also unearthed a Sanskrit inscription and coins belonging to an Indian kingdom. So how did these artifacts land in Egypt? Well, it's more proof of what we've long known. India's global footprint is a centuries-old story. India has been interacting with the world for millennia. It spans trade, cultural exchanges, and even the spread of Indic religions. India has left a mark across the world, which is why symbols of ancient civilization keep emerging around the world. This time, it happens to be Egypt. Our next report tells you more.
India and Egypt are both among the oldest civilizations of the world, and they have a history of close contact from ancient times. So it's no surprise that this statue of the Buddha has been found in Egypt. The statue was found in the ancient Egyptian town of Berenike. According to a statement by Egypt's Antiquities Ministry, a Polish-US mission discovered the statue. The mission was digging at an ancient temple in the seaport town. It said the discovery has important indications over the presence of trade ties between Egypt and India during the Roman era. The statue measures 28 inches in height, and part of its right side, including the leg, are missing. The Buddha is portrayed with a halo around his head, and also a lotus flower by his side. It's not known how exactly the statue landed in Egypt, but if we were taking a guess, the statue got there during the reign of Emperor Ashoka. Ashoka's edicts refer to his relations with Egypt, particularly when Egypt was under the rule of Ptolemy II some 2,300 years ago. It's not just the Buddha's statue that's been found. Archaeologists also stumbled across a Sanskrit inscription, believed to be about 2,000 years old. Apart from the statue and inscription, 2 2nd century coins from the Satavahana Kingdom of India were also found. The port of Berenike was among the main trading hubs of Egypt. It handled ships carrying a variety of products from India. Products like pepper, spices, precious stones, textiles, and even ivory. These goods would be transported on camelbacks across the desert to the Nile River. From there, they eventually found their way to the rest of the Roman Empire. The city of Berenike was itself one of the transit hubs which connected the Mediterranean Sea to the Indian Ocean. Needless to say, trade between India and Egypt was booming, and remnants of ancient ties between both the civilizations are now being unearthed. In 2021, Egyptian torpedo jars were unearthed in the Indian state of Tamil Nadu. Archaeologists believe that the jars were used to transport oil from Egypt to India. And while some Indian artifacts landed in different parts of the world due to trade, others were snatched by force as a result of foreign conquests. According to India's Ministry of Culture, over 200 stolen artifacts have been retrieved since 2014. Most of these came from the UK, Canada, Australia, the US, and France. Again, there's a reason why so much was stolen from India. Up to the 17th century, India was one of the world's largest economies. That made it a target for innumerable invasions and colonial conquests. The discovery of Indian artifacts in Egypt is not a fluke. Egypt has been on a mission lately to revive its tourism industry. And in that endeavor, it has unveiled many archaeological discoveries in recent years. Critics say the Egyptian government is conducting a flurry of excavations. The goal is to find items that grab the media's attention. Egypt plans to attract over 30 million tourists annually by 2028. This would be a significant jump. Before the pandemic, Egypt attracted just 13 million people. Be that as it may, Egypt's quest to unearth artifacts has now shown the kind of relationship it shared with India thousands of years ago.
Complete nonsense.
There's been a lot of talk in recent years about China colonizing Africa. In the unlikely event that that actually happened, it would not be the first colonial relationship between the two regions. In this episode, we'll discuss the first colonial relationship between those two regions, the one in which Africans were the colonizers of China. Colonization is defined as the action or process of settling among and establishing control over the indigenous people of an area. In the ancient world, a colony meant an altogether different thing philosophically than it does in our modern age. Back then, the colonizing relationship was not necessarily exploitative. It wasn't necessarily about appropriating the territory and natural resources of the colonized country for the material benefit of the colonizing power. Colonization in the ancient world, more often than not, was the complete opposite of that, and was done with the intent to enrich the colonized territory, materially and spiritually, and civilize or upgrade its people's lives. So what did Africa have to do with China all those many years ago? Well, to start with, the people of China for the last century have been taught that the Chinese people evolved separately from the rest of the world and were descended from Peking Man, a pale-skinned, remote evolutionary ancestor. But a recent heavy-duty international study undertaken by Chinese scientists and multinational academics has confirmed that the Chinese people did not originate from Peking Man in northern China as was once believed, but rather they had originated from Negroes in East Africa. When this news broke in China, it came as a total shock to the Chinese people. It was especially crushing for those Chinese who held racist views and who were suddenly forced to see at the pinnacle of their cherished and proud ancestry and history, Negroid black Africans. Professor Jin Li, one of China's leading geneticists, led this monumental research project with an international research team that included Russians, Indians, Brazilians, and researchers from many other nations. Professor Jin Li actually had set out originally to prove that the Chinese people evolved separately from everyone else via Homo erectus in China. However, he ended up proving that the modern Chinese actually originated in East Africa. Professor Jin Li's research was based on DNA tests at the National Human Genome Center in Shanghai, China. Following the research, he stated, "Before the project started, I was hoping that I could identify or could be able to find the evidence that supported an independent origin of the Chinese in China. Because I am Chinese, who came from China, and through the educational process, I always believed that there is something special about the Chinese." Professor Li had singled out a male genetic marker that surfaced only about 80,000 years ago in Africa, which means that any man who carries this genetic marker must have recent African ancestors and cannot be a descendant of the more ancient Homo erectus. Professor Li took about 20,000 DNA samples from over 160 ethnic groups across all of East Asia, and after careful analysis in his lab, came to the following conclusion. "We did not see even one single individual that could be considered as a descendant of the Homo erectus in China. Rather, everybody was a descendant of our ancestors from Africa." So Jin Li's research presented evidence affirming that the majority of the gene pools in China originated out of Africa. The final results could not have been made any clearer, and when posed with the question, "How did you feel as a Chinese person?" Professor Li responded, "After I saw the evidence generated in my laboratory, I think we should all be happy with that, because, after all, modern humans from different parts of the world are not too different from each other, and we are all very close relatives." So what all of this means is that Africans were the original people, and all other races are simply variations of the original African Negroid people. Moreover, the appearance of other races is a recent occurrence in world history and occurs after the migrations of Africans into Europe and Asia tens of thousands of years ago. There's also evidence of much more recent waves of migrations of Africans into Asia occurring in the last 2,000 to 5,000 years, and it was those migrating Africans who became the colonizers of China and who contributed massively to the formation and development of functional, civilized Chinese society. The earliest occupants of Asia were described as small black pygmies, and Chinese historians also described the Funanese people of China as small and black. There is a contention by many respected scholars that the San people of southern Africa are the direct ancestors of the Chinese people. According to Nick Gear, professor of history at the University of Idaho in the United States, as the San moved out of southwest Africa towards the east coast, They took with them not only a sophisticated microlithic toolkit, but also shell beads, the oldest such ornament in the current archaeological record. One scientist has speculated that trade in those beads, plus the San policy of sharing meat, were advantages in their survival during their long journey to Asia. The Ainus, Japan's oldest known inhabitants, traditionally refer to a race of black dwarfs who inhabited Japan long before they did. The Ainu people originated in Egypt and are recorded as having made large migrations to the Asian continent, taking with them thousands of years of African knowledge and influence. These migrations would explain the existence of pyramids in China and Japan, which were built by the early African settlers of Asia. The Chinese and Japanese have absolutely no idea as to how the pyramids got there. China's pyramids are located near Xiangfu City in the Shenxi province. The Japanese pyramids were made of stones, not indigenous to Japan. Several underwater pyramids have been found, such as the Yonaguni Pyramid in Japan, which is a step pyramid very similar to the step pyramid of Saqqara in Egypt, testifying to the extremely ancient settlement of Africans in these regions. According to Chancellor Williams, author of The Destruction of Black Civilization, ancient China and the Far East, for example, must be a special area of African research. How do we explain such a large population of blacks in southern China, powerful enough to form a kingdom of their own? Archaeology, the ancient texts, and forensic texts all confirm that China's first two dynasties, the Xia and the Shang, were black African. The first Shang king was Xuan Wang, which means black king. Xuan means black. Another Shang dynasty king was Xuan Niao, meaning black hawk. The Shang kings introduced the solar calendar to China. Anacalypsis is a really important book about ancient Africans in Asia, which was written by an English historian, Godfrey Higgins, born in 1772. Anacalypsis is an extraordinary work of historical research that was published at a time when it was very unpopular and actually dangerous to publish anything seen as favourable to people of African descent. It was published at a time most Europeans had been made to believe that Africans had made absolutely no contributions to world civilization. The highly profitable slave trade could not be disturbed by reminding people that the Africans were a noble, civilized people who pioneered world civilization for thousands of years prior. So the Englishman Godfrey Higgins was extremely brave and courageous to have written Anacalypsis. He had studied at Cambridge and at London's Trinity Hall and become a lawyer. Aged 40, he began his vast research into the origins of nations across the world. It culminated in this great book, which was his biggest and most popularly known publication. In the book, he wrote, "I shall, in the course of this work, produce a number of extraordinary facts, which will be quite sufficient to prove that a black race in very early times had more influence over the affairs of the world than has been lately suspected. And I think I shall show by some very striking circumstances yet existing that the effects of this influence have not entirely passed away." Higgins also repeated the contention of Homer, the ancient Greek philosopher, that there was in existence two major Ethiopian nations, the one in Africa, i.e. all Africa south of Egypt, and the other one in India. In fact, Herodotus, the legendary ancient Greek scholar known as the father of history, referred to India as Eastern Ethiopia. According to Higgins, there were two Ethiopias, one to the east of the Red Sea and the other to the west of it. And a very great nation of blacks did rule over almost all Asia in a very remote era, in fact, beyond the reach of history or any of our records. He went on, "We have found a black complexion or something relating to it whenever we have approached the origin of nations. The alma mater, the goddess Multimamia, the founders of oracles, the Memnons or first idols were always black. Venus, Juno, Jupiter, Apollo, Bacchus, Hercules, Astaroth, Adonis, Horus, Apis, Osiris, Ammon, in short, all the deities were black. The images remain as they were first made in very remote times." Godfrey Higgins continued, "The origins of all the gods have always been of the black race. The ancients viewed the sacred image of the divine as black, and woolly hair was a sign of divinity, called the hair of the gods. In my essay on the Celtic Druid, I have shown that a great nation called Celtae, of whom the Druids were the priests, spread themselves almost over the whole earth, and are to be traced in the gigantic monuments from India to the extremities of Britain. Who these can have been but the early individuals of the black nation of whom we have been treating, I know not, and in this opinion I am not singular. Chinese legends refer to eras of divine dynasties, one being the epoch of the 5 emperors. The first emperor, known as Fuxi, who lived from 2953 BC to 2838 BC, well over 5,000 years ago, is described as being, quote-unquote, a woolly-haired Negro. This modern-day drawing of the emperor was the closest to match that description we could find. Apparently, no artist in China has yet found it worthy to offer a representation of their first emperor that matches his actual description. Fuxi is credited with establishing government, originating social institutions and cultural inventions in China. He taught his people to fish with nets and rear domestic animals. Fuxi was the first to develop writing, organize sacrifices, and taught the worship of the gods, whom he saw as helpers and assistants of the Supreme Being. Also, the Chinese state that marriage was instituted by Fuxi, sexual relations having been previously unrestricted, wrote J.A. Rogers in his famous work Sex and Race. We often take for granted the social and cultural norms in existence across the world. We assume that conventions like marriage, religion, the law, education, the calendar of weeks, months and years and so on have always been with us, but they haven't. It took thousands of years of Africans actually going around the world and introducing these civilized ways and concepts to the world's people for these ideas to become the quote-unquote normal way of doing things that they are today. So Fuxi was a woolly-haired Negro and the father of the Tai Chi philosophy of Yin and Yang. He was also the originator of the Oracle of the I Ching, or the Book of Change, dating back to 909 BC, known to be the oldest and most revered system of prophecy that has influenced the most eminent philosophers of Chinese medicine and thought. Ancient Chinese medicine dates back to the Shang dynasty, founded by the African king Tang around 1500 BC. The Shang and the Chu dynasties were credited with bringing together the elements of Chinese medical concepts. The Shang was given the name Na Qi. Na means black, Qi means man. Na Qi, black man. For the migrating Africans, the promotion of spirituality wherever they went was a recurring feature. The emergence of the Buddha cult in Chinese culture led to the enthronement of African spiritual concepts and principles in the nation of China. The religion had migrated from the other Ethiopia, the one in India, next door to China. Legendary historian Sheikh Anta Diop tells us that Buddha was reported to be a migrating African priest from Egypt. The conventional mainstream story of Gautama Buddha, who was the first of the Buddhas, is that he was an Indian prince born into an Indian royal household. But it's a story that contradicts the visual representation of this personality. We see, for instance, that in almost all the portrayals of Buddha as a statue, he is consistently portrayed as an African with cornrow curly hair, and not with the straight hair of the Indians or the Asians that we should expect if he were truly an Indian. The truth is that all portrayals of Gautama Buddha as a statue or idol in almost all the Buddhist temples all over India and China and the rest of Asia and Oceania depict Gautama Buddha with African Negro physiognomy. And then there's the story of Bao Zeng, the black Chinese Lord of Justice. Bao Zeng, who lived from 999 to 1062, commonly known as the Lord Bao, was a government officer during the reign of Emperor Renzong in ancient China's Song dynasty. During his 25 years in civil service, Bao consistently demonstrated extreme honesty and uprightness, with actions such as sentencing his own uncle, impeaching an uncle of Emperor Renzong's favorite concubine, and punishing powerful families. His appointment from 1057 to 1058 as the prefect of Song's capital, Kaifeng, where he initiated a number of changes to better hear the grievances of the people, made him a legendary figure in China. Nicknamed Justice Bao, Bao Zeng today is respected as a cultural symbol of justice in China. Drama stories about him have appeared in a variety of different literary and dramatic mediums and have enjoyed extreme popularity. across China. In Chinese legends, he is described as a black man and is portrayed in blackface in Chinese operas and plays till this day. The famous Chinese sage Lao Tse, born around 600 BC by tradition, was quote-unquote black in complexion. Lao Tse was described as marvelous and beautiful as jasper. Magnificent and ornate temples were erected for him, inside of which he was worshipped like a god, according to the Atlanta Black Star. H. Imbert, a French anthropologist, said in his book, Les Negritos de la Chine, the Negroid races peopled at some time all the south of India, Indochina, and China. The south of Indochina actually has now pure Negritos as the Semangs and mixed as the Malays and Sakes. Even the sacred Manchu dynasty shows this Negro strain. The lower part of the face of the Emperor Puyi of Manchukuo, direct descendant of the Manchu rulers of China, is most distinctly Negroid. The article also points out the research of Professor Chang Xing Lang and stated that these professors, through their research and studies, believe that a Negro empire actually existed at the dawn of the country's history, citing evidence of substantial populations of blacks in early China, including finding reports of a major kingdom ruled by blacks being frequently mentioned in historical Chinese history documents, and Chinese chroniclers report that a Negro empire existed in the south of China at the dawn of that country's history. And the African dominance of foreign nations went beyond China. According to Godfrey Higgins, Funan is the name given by Chinese historians to the earliest kingdom of Southeast Asia. Its builders were black people known as Khmers, a name that loudly recalls ancient Kemet, Egypt. In remote antiquity, the Khmers seem to have established themselves through a vast area that encompassed Myanmar, Cambodia, Laos, Malaysia, Thailand, and Vietnam. Higgins continued, it was the opinion of eminent historian Sir William Jones that a great nation of blacks formerly possessed the dominion of Asia and held the seat of empire at Sidon. These must have been the people called by Mr. Morris Cushites, described in Genesis, and the opinion that they were blacks is corroborated by the translators of the Pentateuch, called the 70, constantly rendering the word Kush by Ethiopia. The religion of Buddha of India is well known to have been very ancient. In the most ancient temples scattered across Asia, where his worship is yet continued, he is found black as jet, with the flat face, thick lips, and curly hair of the Negro. Several statues of him may be met with the East India Company. There are 2 exemplars of him brooding in the face of the deep upon a coiled serpent. To what time are we to allot this Negro? He will be proved to have been prior to Krishna. He must have been prior to or contemporaneous with the Black Empire supposed by Sir William Jones to have flourished at Sidon, Lebanon. The religion of this Negro god is found by the ruins of his temples and other circumstances to have been spread over an immense extent of country, even to the remotest parts of Britain, and to have been professed by devotees inconceivably numerous. Mr. Wilsford, in his treatise on Egypt and the Nile in the Asiatic Researches, informs us that many very ancient statues of the god Buddha in India have crisp curly hair with flat noses and thick lips, and adds, nor can it be reasonably doubted that a race of Negroes formerly had power and preeminence in India. The learned Morris says the Cushites built the great temples in India and Britain and excavated the caves of the former. And the learned mathematician Reuben Burrow has no hesitation in pronouncing Stonehenge to be a temple of the black curly-headed Buddha. So there we have it. African settlers taught the Chinese to read and write, to domesticate animals, to get married, taught them the spiritual sciences, medicine, and how to use a calendar and dates, taught them statehood and administration by way of the first empires and many other conventions, the very building blocks of their modern civilization. The African colonization of China wasn't unique to China. It was the colonization of virtually the entire world for the spiritual and material progress and benefit of the world's people. The modern world just seems to have forgotten all about these monumental African contributions to our present civilization. But thankfully, we haven't. Thanks for watching this episode. Don't forget to like, comment and subscribe, and look out for the next one on Africa's great civilizations.
If you observe the Buddha's hair type as depicted from the photos in the video, black people and those of African descent will or should already know that only black people and Egyptians present themselves in drawings and artifacts of curly hair, just as shown previously, the same as how the Buddha is depicted. And based upon this information and this research, the Buddha is clearly a person who was born and travelled out of Africa of African descent, not how the Indians and some others may see the Buddha as he currently is today. This is something very interesting to think about and to possibly reconsider. I personally wish countries knew their own history, spoke of their own history and stopped taking other cultures' history. For example, the Buddha was not a god. I believe that's just how the people within that country saw him and looked up to him. We've reached the end of this video now. Thank you for tuning in to watch the latest video. Whether you stumbled upon it by accident or you're a loyal subscriber, we appreciate you taking the time out to watch this. If you enjoyed our video, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and ring the bell to get notified for when we upload new stuff. And if you have any ideas for future videos or just want to say hi, drop a comment below. We read all our comments. Thanks again for watching and tuning into Rayview TV channel. I'll see you in the next one. Goodbye.